Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Sony PANICS as lawsuit alleges discrimination against white job applicants. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. From The Hollywood Reporter, Columbia Records sued for allegedly discriminating against white job applicants. Executive Assistant Patria Paulino alleges the label insisted upon hiring a black candidate to fill an administrative assistant position to boost the appearance of diversity. And from the Daily Mail, exclusive, music boss behind Lorde and the Weeknd sued for reverse racism. Ron Perry bullied his Latina assistant and nixed white job seekers to get color in his office, according to the lawsuit. We have the actual lawsuit here and we can check it out later, but let's get into the story. First, it's important to say when you file a lawsuit like this, it can damage you in the business forever. It doesn't mean everything alleged is actually true, but it does mean if you go out on a limb to file a lawsuit like this, you really are taking a risk of burning bridges in the industry. I mean, she herself was not a very important person at the company. It's not like she has a lot of industry contacts as it is. And now The Hollywood Reporter has to deal with her allegations in a lawsuit. Sony has to deal with her allegations in a lawsuit. It's a very big step to take a lawsuit against a big company like this. We've seen a similar lawsuit. I just did a video earlier today. Woke Hollywood Panic's first major lawsuit takes on DEI. That was from the people at America First Legal because a writer was allegedly denied a job because of his skin color. And that really was the first major lawsuit against DEI in the entertainment industry. But immediately here we have this follow-up with Sony. Everyone knows this is going on at these big entertainment companies. It's just time these lawsuits come forward so they have to answer for what they've been doing. From thedailymail.com, the visionary music executive who signed Lorde the Weeknd and other hit artists has been sued by his former assistant, who says she had to carry out sham interviews with white job seekers in a bid to diversify his office. Ron Perry, the CEO of Columbia Records, that's this guy, is lauded for his pioneering work and close ties with the icons on his label, who include Adele, Beyonce, Bob Dylan, and Bruce Springsteen. Now he's been slapped with a lawsuit. His former assistant, Patria Paulino, that's this lady, paints an ugly portrait of his office in New York City's Flatiron District, saying staff are berated in a toxic racist atmosphere. Perry has little respect for non-white employees like Paulino, a Latina, yet seeks to recruit more color in his office in an effort to keep up appearances in the post-George Floyd era, it is alleged. Her boss belittled and humiliated her, Paulino says. She was made to carry out sham interviews with white job seekers, even though she was told only an African American could get the job, it is claimed. When people go on interviews, I'm sure you've gone on interviews before. I've held a lot of interviews for people I've hired before. Honestly, I feel a little uncomfortable because sometimes I need to interview like 20 people to get somebody right for a position. And I know people have to go and get dressed up. They incur an expense of time and effort and energy. I always try to communicate with people, even the people we don't hire, because I understand it's a big emotional investment for people and a financial investment for people, even to take the time and pay the money for travel, if it's travel involved, to go on these interviews. And here she is, she's doing what her boss asked her to do, but she's interviewing people she knows she can't hire, at least according to her allegations. But they do sound very credible, at least at that point where they say, look, we need to hire a certain person of a certain color, but you're going to need to interview a lot of people. And as far as a boss is concerned, in terms of dealing with their assistant, the attitude a boss would normally have is like, look, you're lucky to have this job as an assistant, so go ahead and do what I'm telling you to do. Don't complain about it. Follow my instructions. That's how a lot of bosses treat assistants. Paulino sued the label, its parent company Sony Music Entertainment, Perry, and 3 other under city and state human rights laws at the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York late last month. Quote, the company knew that they were violating the law, Paulino's lawyer, Erica Schneider, told the Daily Mail. That's precisely why they conducted sham interviews of employees that were already deemed ineligible for the hire based on their race. The suit is especially damaging for Perry. He was one of the first industry leaders to back the Black Lives Matter movement after Floyd's death. And he often works with black artists such as Pharrell Williams and Lil Nas X. According to the 15-page lawsuit, Paulino, a New Jersey resident of Dominican, Spanish, and Italian background, started working for Perry in November 2022. And that's a pretty great job to get if you could be the assistant to the CEO of an actual music label. So what went wrong? She was soon told she was a diversity hire despite her impressive resume, according to her lawsuit. Perry treated her as less qualified because she was Hispanic and would frequently demean, humiliate, and criticize her without cause, it's claimed. He had a preference for Caucasian employees, she was told. But Perry has a problem, the case alleges. Former employees had made multiple racial discrimination complaints against him, and he was under pressure to diversify his mostly white office to keep up with peers, like Sony CEO Rob Stringer, according to the lawsuit. Paulino was tasked with vetting candidates for an administrative assistant. She was directed to break discrimination laws by interviewing applicants of all backgrounds, but to only let a person of color make it through the final round, according to the lawsuit. Paulino refused to play along. She advanced candidates she saw as qualified, regardless of their skin color. Now, she's an assistant. Does she have the authority to do whatever she wants to do, even though she's been given alternative instructions? That's a good question. The instructions, if they're true, aren't legal instructions, but her employer is not going to hire them, apparently, because they've decided they only want a black candidate for this job. It gets complicated. If I was her boss, I wouldn't have told her that. I would have wanted somebody who was qualified. Other than that, if somebody's doing something illegal, how is she going to follow his instructions? It gets very complicated very quickly. But the power dynamic is the boss gets to say who's hired. She doesn't get to pick out whoever she thinks is qualified if he's given her alternate instructions, until it becomes illegal, and then her only recourse is to report it to Human Resources. But if he's the CEO of the company, Human Resources is not going to go against what he says to do. All she could really do is leave the company and file this lawsuit and hope for the best. Paulino going off and deciding she was going to do what she thought was right put her at odds with her boss Perry and his Human Resources chiefs Kimberly Greenman, Jennifer Schechter, and Alexa Abrams. When Paulino advanced non-black candidates, HR bosses reminded her about the diversity situation or indicated that the applicant doesn't fit the box that they needed to tick, according to her lawsuit. In one instance, Paulino was allegedly told, "We can't hire another white Jewish girl, unfortunately." And here's the text message. "We can't hire another white Jewish girl, unfortunately." Is that illegal? Well, the statement in and of itself isn't illegal. The policy, though, is illegal. You can't actually make a decision and say, well, we don't want this person because of their skin color. We don't want this person because of their religious observances. You can't do that, even if it's for the goal of trying to advance some sort of agenda. You can't save a spot for a job legally for someone of a certain skin color or religion. It's just not legal. In reference to another candidate, she was allegedly told they can't be hired because they're not black. When Paulino complained about the racial discrimination, Schechter allegedly said, "My HR ears can't hear this." Some of these comments were relayed in text messages. Paulino says that she was working 80 hours a week carrying out phony sit-downs with qualified white candidates who never stood a chance. And you can imagine these candidates, they're going to these job interviews hoping they're going to get the job, updating their resumes, getting nervous, talking to their friends about it, talking to family members about it, asking for advice, preparing themselves for the interview. Oh, I'm going to Columbia Records. I might get the assistant job to the CEO, potentially overextending themselves on credit cards, hanging in there on their expenses just a little bit longer because they might get this job. But in reality, the only reason they're getting an interview is because the CEO needs the HR people to have plausible deniability that they weren't actually discriminating against people of certain skin colors or genders. It's a really terrible thing to do. These are the people that can't afford this. They can't afford at their own personal expense to provide plausible deniability so that a CEO doesn't get in trouble. In all, more than a dozen applicants were rejected because of their race. Ultimately, the relationship broke down. In March 2023, Greenman told Paulino that Perry felt she was not really working out and pressured her to resign. This is her boss not even going to her and saying, "Hey, I don't think it's working out, and here's why." He's going to Human Resources and having Human Resources get rid of her because she's not discriminating enough, at least according to her lawsuit. Paulino quit and was quickly replaced, and a black applicant was given the administrative role according to her lawsuit. The defendants created intolerable working conditions by requiring the plaintiff to participate in the company's discriminatory hiring practices and by coercing her to submitting her resignation. Paulino seeks a jury trial, her costs paid, and punitive damages against the company. The case paints a complicated picture of racial discrimination in New York's present-day entertainment industry, with executives rejecting qualified white candidates in a bid to appear more diverse. In a similar case, a freelance writer for the hit show SEAL Team last month sued CBS Studios for repeatedly denying him a staff job while instead hiring less qualified black LGBT women and other diversity recruits. Advocates say so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion schemes bring more black, brown, female, and queer talent into workplaces and colleges and raise morale across the board. But critics say they're a woke virtue-signaling exercise that fosters backlash discrimination against straight white men. Her boss, Perry, is set to receive the 2024 Music Visionary of the Year award from the UJA Federation at a ceremony in New York this spring. The group called him a true trailblazer and one of the new leaders of our industry. Here are some additional text messages from Paulino. She's making reference here to an applicant, Eric W. He worked for blank, helped on Avery and Monte's desk too. HR asks, is he POC? Super important. Paulino responds, so I couldn't tell, seems like he's Hispanic, but definitely would have to see if that was checked off in his application. This is them directly making a decision about whether or not he's allowed to move forward in the recruiting and hiring process based upon whether or not he's a person of color. If he's not, according to Paulino's bosses, it's super important. He's not allowed to move forward with the job potentially unless he's a person of color. So the story here is the Latina assistant is let go because she's in an intolerable work environment where she's being asked to break laws. She's obviously very uncomfortable about it. So she's forced to resign because she doesn't want to break the law. And the law breaking was requiring her to interview all applicants to waste people's time, even though she was only allowed to hire someone who was a POC, a person of color. The lawsuit has been filed and Sony has already responded. Here's what they had to say. In a court filing this Wednesday, lawyers for the company called the allegations contradictory and false. Quote, she alleges under New York State and New York City law that defendants both discriminated against her because they preferred white employees, but also constructively discharged her. That means essentially forced her to quit because she would not play along with their preference for non-white employees, the filing states. In reality, plaintiff worked for Sony Music Entertainment for less than 5 months, performed poorly, and was a willing participant in the entirely legal hiring practices she now alleges were discriminatory. She then voluntarily resigned after receiving unfavorable performance feedback. She seeks now to harass her former employer and boss, who sought only to help her succeed in her job. Here's what she claims in the actual lawsuit, Patria Paulino versus Sony Music. Nature of the case. Plaintiff brings this action against her former employer for violations of the New York State human rights law and the New York City human rights law. Plaintiff was hired as an executive assistant for Ron Perry, the chairman and chief executive officer of Columbia Records, although plaintiff was tasked with screening candidates for the subordinate administrative assistant position. She was explicitly told that she could only hire black candidates for the role. Nevertheless, in order to conceal its illegal conduct, defendant's Human Resources Department sent plaintiff a diverse pool of candidates to interview, including Caucasian candidates, when plaintiff opposed defendant's discriminatory hiring process by recommending qualified non-black candidates. Defendants constructively terminated plaintiff's employment. As a Hispanic employee, plaintiff herself was also subjected to discrimination throughout the course of her employment. Despite exemplary qualifications, plaintiff was labeled as a diversity hire and was perceived by Ron Perry as less qualified because of her race and treated less favorably than her Caucasian counterparts. We know diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that employers are pushing very heavily. We also know it's not quite legal because it pushes a political agenda and ideological agenda without consideration for people's civil rights. The people who push diversity, equity, and inclusion rely on a concept called collective guilt. Collective guilt is like this inherently communist, sick idea where because somebody of a certain skin color did something to one of your ancestors, somehow you're responsible as a group member because of your skin color. It's the opposite of everything that's American. Everyone in America has constitutional rights. We all deserve to be treated equally. We have laws for this. We have the Civil Rights Act. We have state laws. In New York City, we even have city laws. They protect people against discrimination based on their skin color, their gender, or their sexual preferences, or other different differences. Everybody has to be treated the same way. I don't know Patria Paulino. I don't know if all of these claims are accurate. But I know it is a big deal to have to go through filing a lawsuit. She's apparently been working on this for about a year and dealing with this for a year. And while there's no guarantee of legitimacy, going through the process of suing a big company like this is much more difficult for an individual than it is for another company. This is the second big lawsuit against an entertainment industry player, along with the CBS Paramount discrimination lawsuit for the writer who wrote SEAL Team. And it will be interesting to see what happens. But to see a Latina filing a lawsuit because she wasn't allowed to hire a white employee really tells you that diversity, equity, and inclusion has gone too far, and it's great to see these big companies starting to get challenged. The more we call out discrimination when we see it, the more likely it is it becomes too expensive for these companies to continue doing it. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.